Welcome to the glassworking shop. This is the third video in a series where I'm going to be working on a multi-level, multi-component marine assembly. In today's video, I'm going to be combining the components together and make a squeezed triangle shape. A lot of the pieces that I made, a lot of the components that I made were made off camera because the process was essentially repetitive, pretty much the same thing over and over again, and I don't want to be too repetitive. I just want to make videos of different processes, and who knows, maybe someday if somebody wants to see every single step, repetitive or not, I might do that too. This diagram shows the basic idea of how I'm going to put the pieces together. Of course, surprises do occur when working with glass, and I've never done this particular pattern before, so we'll see how it comes out. I'm going to prepare some punties, and for this work, because the final piece is going to be pretty heavy, and I want to be really careful to ensure that it stays under control, and then when it comes time to pull it, I want to have a really nice big moil. So I'm using a 20 millimeter punty rod, and one of the great advantages of the NQALHA is that handwork, it's really inconvenient to spin a 20 millimeter rod. It's more convenient to spin a 12 millimeter or a 10 millimeter. When working with the NQALHA, that limitation is removed, and it's fairly easy to deal with the larger diameter rods. And of course, the larger diameter rods give a lot more stability and a lot more control, and work, especially with a very big moil, work really well for pulling down a piece. And of course, after investing this much time in making the components, I don't want to waste most of my glass in the knuckles. And so I like using a fairly large moil on the end of a fairly large punty. So, getting this guy ready here. I could set up the squeezer and squeeze it into position, but for this application, I think I'm just gonna kind of adjust the end by hand a little bit. Now, before everything is squeezed and before everything is assembled, I'm starting with a round rod, so it won't really be a triangle at first. So I'm going to kind of taper the nose of this guy down, and then later, when it's being assembled and squeezed into a triangle, I'll get it hot and triangularize the moil to get it to match the pattern. But to start off with here, I'm making a kind of a somewhat circular end that just a little bit bigger. Okay. My other moil is already the right size. It's sitting there in the kiln waiting for use, and so it really doesn't need to have any preparation. What I'm going to do now, this is just a 2-layer bullseye with a yellow core and a black outside, and was prepared a while ago. I usually keep a stock of stuff that I've made so that as the inspiration strikes, I can just go grab one without having to make everything from scratch every time. I'm going to be taking this and pulling it down into a reasonably small stringer. The center core that I made in the first video is about 1 inch in diameter. It's about 1 inch diameter cylinder, which will be squeezed in a special set of squeezing dies, and then a variety of different size rods, some approximately 10 millimeters, some approximately 6 millimeter, some just standard color rods that don't have any multiple layers, will all be used. So I'm attempting to pull a somewhat uniform stringer here. That's a technique that I'm still working on. I watch the master stringer pullers pulling a 3-foot long, perfect 3-foot long stringer. Think, wow, that looks really easy, till I try to do it. I think the people that really know how to do it get it right the first time and don't end up trying to fix lumps. But hey, for what I'm doing, for the place that it's going to go in the design, I believe this will be adequate. And I don't think I'm going to need more than that, but I'll go ahead and make up another one. The small marine pieces that I'm pulling down, let me get this off the bench. The small marine pieces that I'm pulling down, I'm not being super careful about preheating because I'm pretty confident they're not going to explode, so I just take them off the bench at room temperature and get right to it. The larger pieces are being preheated in the kiln because pretty much anything over about 7 millimeters or so will just explode if you stick it right in the flame. So maybe I need to take stringer pulling lessons from somebody who's really good at it. Of course, being an inventor, I also think maybe I should invent a stringer pulling machine. Pull to precise dimension, especially for some of those people that do their kind of like pixel-oriented marines out of thousands of stringers. Boy, I bet they would love an automated machine. But hey, too many ideas, not enough time. Got to really carefully choose. Of course, being a machinist and inventor who's also attempting to learn glasswork, it's always the challenge. Do I go out in the machine shop today? Do I go out in the glassworking shop? Do I sit at the computer and work on SolidWorks? this one's a little thicker. I might actually like this one a little bit better. But we'll see as the piece starts to take form. It'll become more and more obvious what the correct piece to use will be. Now, I'm probably going to speed up a bunch of this because a lot of it is going to be pretty repetitive and pretty boring. But now I'm resizing another one of the pieces. This is also a two-layer murrine, white with a black outside. And it was made a couple of days ago. Because it's a little bit larger than the others, I did preheat it in the kiln just to be safe. And get some of that pesky kiln dust off the thing. Even after preheating, I'm still kind of gentle when I first apply the flame. I really suck at this point in the process. I have my stuff start to explode. Even when I'm heating a fairly small piece, sometimes I like the Delta Mag flame, not because it's hotter, but just because it covers more area and allows me to get a little bit more uniform heating. I also kind of go sideways a little bit. And of course I realize that the whole key to getting a good uniform pull is getting the heat right. And as I continue my exploration and adventure in glasswork, I'm getting a little bit better at controlling the heat and understanding the heat. Probably the most difficult thing about glass for me is how slowly everything goes. That glass is basically an insulator. And I remember one of my teachers telling me, when you think it's hot enough, probably only halfway, if that. Barely halfway, if that. And I've been trying to keep that in mind. Of course, the very experienced glassworkers see things that I don't see and feel things that I don't feel. But little bit by little bit, the adventure continues. The results seem to get better every time. I'm aiming here to get a little bit over a 6 millimeter, slightly over the size of a color rod. I also am going to need 12 linear inches of material, a little over 12. So one trick that I'm finding to deal with my limited skill that my teachers tell me, why do you do it that way? Why do you make it one size and then spend all that time carefully resizing it? Why don't you just pull it to size in the first pull? And well, don't quite have the skill to do it yet. So I can actually achieve a successful result, a more successful result, by pulling to the initial size, reheating, resizing, and just going really slow. I have no doubt that my more experienced teachers would have been done a long time ago. But, you know, at least I have a method where I can accomplish success. And probably if I spent the rest of the day dicking with this, I could get it nearly perfect. But considering where it's going in the design and how it's going to be positioned and how it's going to be squeezed, thinking that may be good enough. Yep. Certainly not going to win the how uniform can you pull a marine competition, but I believe it's going to be adequate for the work at hand. So, go get another one. Continuing my discipline here of keeping all my tools in the tool rack and not ending up with my bench covered with tools and trash. I've got my stringers because they're going to be used in the next operation. Got some glass rods for tearing off and for using as handles. Got the Bunsen in the back, the graphite, a couple of metal racks, but just in general, I'm trying to keep the bench as empty as I possibly can, because it's so easy for a glassworking bench to turn into a horizontal trash can. This little piece, which is currently about a ½ inch in diameter, needs to be reduced in size to about 8 millimeters or so. and lengthened to a little over 3 inches. The maximum size that the squeezer can handle, the height of the squeezer dies, is 4 inches, and I find that just in general 3 inches is a good size. Once pieces get longer than that, they start flopping around a little bit, get harder to control. Of course, this, to a certain extent, this imposes a constraint on the designs that I'm making. If I start with a 3 or 3.5 inch long piece, and usually the ends aren't that good, so I usually don't get 3 inches of usable material, but then if I have to cut it up and have a saw kerf, I have to somewhat plan in advance to make sure that when I'm done with everything, I have enough pieces to actually finish my design. Okay, I believe that that is going to be that. Now back over to the kiln again. I've got one more piece that I need to pull down into a stringer, and then after that I'm going to get busy making the real design. Just to review what's going on, give an overview of what's going on. I've got a 1 inch diameter 5-layer core, which is going to be squeezed into a shape, kind of an odd shape that I haven't had much experience with. So this is going to be a little bit of an experiment here, but a lot of things I do are experimental. Then I have some 7mm, actually, yeah, I got some approximately 7 or 8mm murrine that I'm going to add to the pattern. Some 3 or 4mm murrine that I'm going to add to the pattern. I'm going to throw in a couple of pieces of just solid color rod, and then add the flattened piece, the somewhat rectangular piece that I made in video number 2. From what I have seen of the real expert stringer pullers, they kind of heat the big end and then get their heat and timing perfect. So they just continually pull out a stringer, a uniform size stringer, out of the glass on the big end. And boy, that's a terrible stringer. But I'm not going to complain. I'm just going to say, I bet I have enough of the good stuff to get the job done. So I'm arranging them on the bench because they all have black outside. Need to make sure that I understand which one is which. I'm going to get this one kind of a little bit better prepared. There we go. So, now it's time to get out the core. Let me get that punty going. Okay. I'm going to get the end of the punty pretty darn hot here. Make sure I get a decent weld. I'd hate for this thing to fall off during the work. So, I'm going to get the end of this moil pretty hot. Don't want to overheat. I just want to get my marine core barely hot enough to stick. Just get it to glow a little. I not want to try to preserve as much of the pattern as I have, but I want the end of that guy to be ripping hot. And there we have it. I'm gonna go over here and take care of some of that kiln dust, and then do a little moil adjustment here. And make sure that the attachment point is good and hot as I prepare okay, got a little bit more on center, and then very gently in the outer flame just start soaking a little heat into it. Even though it came out of the kiln, I want to be pretty careful about how I reheat the thing. And then, while I'm heating, let me get the camera going here on the squeezer. Another nice thing about the NQALHA that I can have the piece sitting there spinning, don't have to really pay attention to it. I can go over and do something else. I could have prepared the squeezer ahead of time, but I wanted to demonstrate the quick disconnect dies and how quick it is to do the setup. This is a very special set of dies. You can probably see Boy, that's an interesting squeeze. Wonder what that's going to look like. This is actually the first time that this squeezer die rig has been used. Now what I'm trying to do here, I'm going to be doing some pretty extreme squeezing on this piece. And want to get the core hot. So first thing I'm doing is just very gently in the far flame, starting to bring it up to temperature, realizing, like my teacher said, glass is an insulator and it takes a really long time, way more time than a beginner realizes. Especially since I have the experience of being a metal worker, and I have my intuition about how heat flows through materials. A lot of it is based on my experience with metalwork. And heat moves through metal in a completely different way. I'm gonna cool the outside a little bit on the graphite so I don't overheat the outside as I'm trying to build core heat, build a heat base inside. As I look at the end of the thing, it's black. I got almost no core heat at all in this piece. So slowly and gently. Another nice thing about the NQALHA is that I don't get impatient. It's much easier for me just to stand back, let the machine do the work. Back when I started glasswork and I started doing it by hand, I always got impatient. My hand got tired. I was thinking, hey, is this thing hot yet? Oh, come on, I don't want to spin anymore. Getting a little bit of droop. I think we're getting close here. As I start to see a little bit of droop, I switch over to handwork. I suspect that maybe someday I'll have sufficient hand skill, or sufficient NQALHA skill, I should say, that I'll be able to continue past the droopy stage on the NQALHA. But for now, I'm concentrating, now that it's starting to droop, I don't want to overheat the center. I want to kind of concentrate my heating on the ends, because it's real easy to overheat the center of these things. Now, of course, keep in mind that this new set of squeezing dies is experimental. This is actually the first time I've ever tried this configuration. I'm not sure exactly what to expect. So, my biggest question is, do I go slow and try to get a lot done in the first squeeze, or do I go fast and try to get a lot done in the first squeeze, or do I go slow and try to gently get it over multiple squeezes? I'll probably make the decision while I'm doing it, while I'm feeling and observing the first squeeze. So here goes, first squeeze. Oh, I like it. Starting to become an interesting pattern. Of course, to accomplish the design that I'm working on, I'm going to require several of these squeezes because I want to get the V grooves fairly deep into the glass. And of course, that is going to be the question in this process. How deep can I get them? What's going on with the glass when that cold graphite hits the surface? How deep am I going to be able to get this divot pattern? It's also, even after I'm trying my best to get the heat on the ends, it's still a little bit bigger in the middle than it is on the ends. So I'm going to try, and also I need to match my moil to the pattern. Yeah, that's getting a little more like it. I still haven't figured out the perfect strategy for doing this kind of work with the squeezer, because the initial shape of the piece is very different from the final shape, and I want my moil to be able to deal with the final piece. And of course, I'm now realizing that I have my moil out of sequence here. Made a little mistake. I don't think this is a serious mistake. I think it's certainly recoverable, but next time I do this, I'm going to be a lot more careful about lining up the moil pattern first time I put it in the squeezer. But hey, that's what first times are all about. For most of my engineering career, I've worked in R&D labs, and I tend to approach glasswork very much like R&D. Just learn whatever I can, invent whatever I can, take what my teachers give me, expand on it, see what capabilities my tools provide for me, and as I'm learning glasswork, hopefully I'm also inventing tools and techniques. So what I'm doing now is trying to recover from that stupid mistake and getting my moil more aligned with the shape that I'm squeezing. And it doesn't really have to be perfect. Just I can't believe I made that mistake, but you know, That's how you learn. When I was learning woodwork and metalwork, I first started to believe that I was getting good at it when I could recover from mistakes, when I could always produce a useful, or in some cases a marketable, back when I was selling my work, I could always produce a marketable result no matter how bad things went wrong. And when I got to that point, that's when I started believing, hey, you're getting pretty good at this, dude. And of course, I'm sure this is true in glasswork as well. I've read comments where people say things like, it's not what you can make, it's what you can keep. Of course, next time I do one of these, I'll have a much, much better idea of what size and geometry to make the moil, because I'm spending way more time than I should just kind of dicking around getting the moil into shape. So of course, the problem with the moil, it acts as a kind of a stop, and so I can't really get down to the bottom of the piece, because in the squeezer there's a graphite piece at the bottom. And so let me try with the bench graphite here. Trying to shorten the piece and get the end a little bigger, and to make it a little more uniform overall. And of course, as I'm exploring and inventing the technique on the squeezer, I'm finding that sometimes it's really good to alternate back and forth. Some things are great on the squeezer, some things are great on the bench graphite. I think I may have discovered some sort of limit here. It seems that even as I get the piece hot, I'm not getting a lot of squeezing action going, and there may be something going on in the glass that's causing it to cool below squeezing temperature before I can get deeper channels, although these channels are pretty much what I want, and I shouldn't be complaining. This is pretty close to exactly what I was expecting when I started the process. So there, if you can see it in the camera here, there is my 3-lobe piece, and Let me just get the Bunsen going here. Keep it hot on the Bunsen, and I'm going to grab the next pieces for the next step. Of course, once again, I'm demonstrating what's nice about the NQALHA. Can be doing something else. Keep my piece over the Bunsen, keep it hot. Now this guy is one that I made yesterday. I didn't video this because pretty much my standard bullseye marine technique. And I originally thought that it wouldn't need to be resized, but now that I see it, I might end up dicking with it a little bit. It's almost the right size, but this 3-layer marine is going to go into the grooves I just made. And since I wasn't exactly sure, I mean, I made the dies, the squeezer dies pretty precisely on the CNC, but I wasn't quite sure how the glass was going to react to that, and I wasn't quite sure what size to make this rod. So now that I have a little better idea what's going on, I can size it up to more precisely fit. Okay, so this guy is pretty much preheated. I don't think it's going to explode when I apply torch to it. I'm going to put the NQALHA in position mode and light up the hand torch using the Mirage hand torch with a somewhere between a neutral and an oxidizing flame. And I'm going to attempt to stick this guy into this slot. And like I said, this is a new technique that I'm exploring here. I haven't used this before in my previous designs. So I have limited, very limited experience in trying to do this. I believe that it is probably tagged well enough go back to rotation mode. Lock off the twist axis. Put my piece back in the outer fire. I'm going to be squeezing this with the fixed size squeezing dies. And remember that what I said, the fixed size squeezing dies require that you use the correct size die. One size does not fit all, and okay, always assume that dies are hot when they have just recently been used for squeezing, even though I suspect they're probably okay, but trying to develop the discipline of just always being careful. Now, my dies that I'm putting in are known to be cold because they're coming off the rack. So I'm going to select some dies here that I believe are moderately close to the correct size. Meanwhile, the NQALHA has been happily keeping my piece hot. And I think I'm going to start out here. I still want this piece that I've added to be somewhat round because I'm going to be adding a bunch of other pieces around it. So I don't want to completely squeeze it and flatten it out quite yet, but I do want to give it a bit of a squeeze just to make sure the camera's on. I do want to give it a little bit of a squeeze just to make sure that it's not going to fall off as I continue to build up this piece. And well, let's see. That end is just a little bit on the long side for me. So okay. I'm going to return to positioning mode and put on the next of the 10mm pieces. Lock off the twist axis. Actually, let me position it a little bit here. Get that guy. A little bit of visibility here. Like my moil is getting a little bit cold. I don't like that. I'm going to try something here. Try something that I've never done before and see if I'm going to get in trouble. This section in the center is a little bit on the fat side. So I'm going to try, yeah, there it goes. I'm going to try pulling it out while I'm putting it in place. Okay, I'm going to save that end. It's probably going to be useful for something. Back into rotation mode, and I'm going to see if I can deal with this moil problem. Keeping everything hot, especially when working with large solid pieces, can often be a challenge. Okay, my moil is getting happy again. So now the next steps in the operation are going to be to apply some of those stringers that I was making. Get this guy back in the squeezer. Once again, I don't want to squeeze it completely flat. I just want to make sure that it's nicely tagged and nicely connected so that it doesn't fall out. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to be doing and I think that's going to be safe for me. Back to positioning mode, and let's move around here, and I'm going to be striping with one of the pieces of murrine that I made, and I'm going to cut that end off. I don't really like that end that much. I'm starting with my 10 millimeter piece of 2-layer murrine, actually 3-layer murrine, and then I'm going to stripe down the side here with a piece of 2-layer, which I kind of sized up into size in the earlier part of the demo. Trying to get the attachment point fairly hot so that the glass flows into that little acute angle there and eliminates air. Although this piece is going to have so much squeezing and manipulation, cutting and squeezing and cutting and squeezing, that it'll probably end up driving the air out eventually just on its own. But still, it doesn't hurt to think about it while I'm doing it. If I don't introduce air, I don't have to drive it out. Being very careful to keep the back end of this hot, keep my moil hot. Okay, looks like I'm going to have plenty of this rod. A little left over for later. And now, back to rotation mode, back to some fire. And I can get it back on center a little bit. Soak a little more heat into it. Get the next piece in the assembly preheated. As I watch the work of other glass workers, especially the very, very talented marine artists, I'm just amazed at the possibility of this art form. And gadzooks, some of the stuff that I've seen is just astoundingly amazing. And little bit by little bit, as I take lessons and try to figure it out on my own. Hopefully I may someday approach some of that nice work that I've seen. But wow, there are some amazing artists out there. So this piece that I'm making is another, I think it's about a 4 or 5 layer, and it's going to form the corner of the triangle, and then when it becomes a hexagon, it's going to form the center of the hexagon. And so hopefully if everything stays nicely aligned, I'll have a really nice pattern as these triangles form together into a hexagon. Of course, that's part of the challenge of this is trying to get the corners to all line up, get the pattern to look good. I'm probably not going to use scissors to cut off the end anymore. I think I'll go back to diamond shears. Okay. So, bit by bit, return to rotation mode, lock off the twist axis, keep the moil hot, so many things to keep under control, and I keep adding things. And I'm doing a 4-camera video shoot. Oh. I suppose I could have taken up stamp collecting, but I always like to try different difficult things. I get bored easily. I don't think I'm going to get bored with glasswork. Notice that I stopped it. It's a very effective way to get a piece back on center. So coming out of the kiln now is the flat piece that I made in video number 2. And back when I was making it, I was somewhat guessing what size it was going to be. And because I didn't know exactly how all of this squeezing madness was going to turn out, and it looks like my guess was roughly in the ballpark, so I have very little adjustment to do here. I am going to adjust a little bit. I'm going to use gravity here to get that end to droop down a little bit. And then, of course, you know, the end really isn't that good. And I knew that going in. This is no surprise. So I'm just going to cut that guy off. Okay, boy oh boy, getting ready now to attach the flat piece. I'm trying. Let's see how good I can get this. Trying to tag it on and keep it somewhat parallel. Not perfect, but hey, this is first time I ever attached a flat piece to the side of a triangle. First time ever. And that, let's see if I can get this guy off my bench. The benchtop surface, of course, is fireproof, so don't have to be that horribly careful about keeping the hot glass off it, but okay. The assembly is taking shape. Got my piece a little bit off, but maybe I can adjust it a tiny bit. Right now my focus is just on keeping everything hot. I don't want to get this with all the work I've put into this. Certainly don't want the thing cracking or exploding. Okay, you know, let me try this. Okay, try putting Mr. Bunsen on the moil. See if that keeps me out of trouble. So what I'm trying to do here, and I'm not going to have a whole lot of luck, and I think the more I try dicking with this, the worse I'm going to make it, so I'm not going to try very much at all. Oh. And make sure it's in position mode where it's locked in place. It was in rotation mode with the axis configured to be free when it was stopped. So when I applied that little bit of paddle pressure, it didn't hold the piece. If I wanted to stay in rotation mode while doing that, oh, look at that. Boy, I just cleaned it right up. Wrong pedal. I just cleaned it right up. Of course, this is an excellent demonstration of the use of the NQALHA as an assembly tool. It's like, hold your piece in the NQALHA, use a hand torch, use a paddle, and that, wow. I think I pretty much corrected at least most of my unevenness there. Gadzooks. Chance I'm actually going to get good at this one day. Now, I'll go back to rotation for a moment. Get Mr. Bunsen out of the way. Return to Moil Patrol. The next thing that I'm going to be applying here, and I am actually getting fairly close to completion on this piece. Next thing I'm going to be applying is just a white color rod. And it might be a good idea. Starting to get hot in here on a 90-degree day in the glassworking shop in beautiful Nevada City in the Northern California forest. And then again, I don't mind the heat. I love the heat. I'm a desert rat. Might as well get that a little more heat into it and just make sure that my flat piece is nicely tagged in place. Okay, so I'm going to be applying a color rod. Get the NQALHA back into position mode for assembly here. I'm going to be applying a color rod, white, North Star Star White. I made a tiny bit of a mess there on the end. Return to rotation mode, lock off the twist axis, get back to Moil Patrol. Boy, this guy is getting pretty close to finished, and as the finished size is now starting to become apparent, because it's difficult to predict in advance what's going to go on here. Let me get the squeezer camera going. Keep the piece hot in the outside flame. Okay, gonna switch to larger squeezer dies. Now that I see the full size of this assembly, it looks like I'm gonna probably have to use, yeah, a larger squeezer die. I have a wide variety of these squeezer dies in different sizes. Group back on center. Back on Moil Patrol. Gonna start massaging this thing into a triangle shape, trying to keep the corners right at the corners, which is always the trickiest part. But it looks like I'm in pretty good shape. The large flat piece that I made out of the squeezed 3-layer bullseye is going to form the outer rim, the outer edge of the hexagon. And then a piece that I welded on to the corner of the triangle is going to form the center. Okay. Now, as you can see, starting to become a fairly large piece of glass here. When I'm working with very large pieces of triangular glass, I kind of switch to hand work because I don't want to overheat the corners as I'm trying to soak heat into the core. And I don't really have a optimized triangle motion in the NQALHA. Probably isn't even possible. Boy, oh boy, getting triangularized. Go back over to the marver here and just kind of make sure that my corners are staying under control. And then probably one more squeeze, and I'll put on the final, last and final little stringers, and then squeeze it into the final shape. Let it droop down a little bit. Into position mode. And for the little stringers, I only need a little torch. So that's what I'm going to use. Yeah. That's looking pretty good. Yeah. Tiny bit more fire. And as I see how the pattern is developing, changing my design just a little bit. Not much, just a little bit. I am getting a little bit better at planning. When I started, everything was improvised, usually in a panic when stuff was going wrong. And now I'm starting out with a plan, more or less executing the plan, and more or less staying out of trouble. Although, like they say, glass has an attitude, and even the extremely proficient glassworkers sometimes have a bad day at the torch. When I started making my sculptures, my first one was using aluminum, which is easy to machine. I'm really familiar with it because most of the work I do in the machine shop is in aluminum. Oh, there's a curve I'm going to have to get straightened out again. Most of the work I do in the shop is aluminum. I'm very familiar with aluminum, but aluminum corrodes. So on the first one of my sculptures, I started using woodworking lacquer and didn't really like the way it looked. Then on the next ones, I tried using paste wax, which I read somewhere in some car enthusiast forum that people use paste wax for aluminum wheels to keep them nice. And I'm not sure if that worked or not. It might have worked, it might not. We'll see how long the sculptures continue to look good. But I just received a nickel plating kit, and I believe it's possible to nickel plate aluminum if it's first treated with a chemical called zincate. And if the nickel-plated aluminum looks terrible, I'll probably try nickel-plated steel, because steel isn't that horribly hard to work with. The camera that I'm using for the squeezer is my still camera, and it does video, but it doesn't do video really, really well. It's a bit of a pain in the ass to use. Okay. Return to hand heating, observing that it's more or less staying in shape. Actually looking pretty good. Try to massage those corners a little bit. I really, really like the Delta Mag for doing big work like this. I suppose it's possible to do work at this scale with a smaller torch, but my teachers all recommended, hey, if you're going to be doing that kind of stuff, you need a big torch. And we are getting it into a pretty nice triangular shape here. I'm almost thinking that I might want to step up one size in squeezing dies. Either that, or let the piece droop down a little. Oh yeah, that's looking pretty good. I think I may, assuming nothing catastrophically fails in the last few minutes, I may actually have a successful video here. Of course, as every glassworker knows, things can go wrong right at the end of a project where you've spent many, many hours, and it cracks, falls off the punty, explodes. Glass has an attitude. Okay, it's a little bigger at the bottom, but the bottom has a nice shape to it. Looks pretty well fused together. So probably going to give it one more squeeze on the bottom and then move toward the moil. Another thing that the squeezer does that, not necessarily a good thing, but the thing that I have to be aware of is, everything flexes. The driving chain is at the bottom, and even though I made the dies and their supports out of reasonably thick material, the bottom tends to squeeze a little tighter than the top. So I have to keep that in mind while working. What I just did there, I concentrated my heat at the moil end of the piece and gave it a little bit of vertical squeeze, a little bit of squeeze downward when I put it in the squeezer. And like everything I do in glasswork, it's always a balance. It's like, how long do I keep dicking with it? When do I finally say that's good enough? It ain't getting no better. Okay, and that is the shape. So now I'm going to get my puller out, which I pre-made in a triangle form and preheated in the kiln. And it's not quite the perfect shape, but I didn't know what the perfect shape was going to be when I started, because these are always a little bit of a surprise. I start working on getting my heat base going. I've already got a pretty good amount of core heat built up in the piece, and I'm planning, of course the radiant heat here is just brutal. I have a chrome suit on order, and hopefully it'll arrive pretty soon. But for today, I'm just gonna endure the pain, hope I can get the job done, and try to pull this triangle down to about an inch. Okay. Boy, things are getting exciting now. Final operation. I'm gonna switch to handwork here. Make sure that end stays hot. Get my piece nice and hot. The wide-shot camera stopped working. I think the battery died, which is really strange since I put a fresh battery in. It was high capacity, and oh no, more troubleshooting. So I guess you don't get to see the pull, but here's how it came out. Kind of almost straight. Doesn't have to be perfectly uniform because it'll be resized before it's assembled into a hex. So sorry about the problem. Thank you for watching.